The forest didn't feel like Europe. It felt older, the kind of older that whispered in bone, not language. Pines rose like cathedral walls, their breath wet with fog, and somewhere between the moss-covered logs and the frozen mud was a silence so thick it almost sounded like drums. The Americans called it the Ardennes. Maze. But to him, he only ever answered to two feathers. It was a hunting ground, the last one he'd ever walk, and maybe the most sacred. No one saw him arrive, not really. Just a quiet replacement sent from the 45th Infantry, a whisper from the dusty roads of Oklahoma where he'd spent half his life invisible to paperwork. His boots were second-hand, rifle slung carelessly like it meant nothing. But every squad that passed through the woods left with fewer men than they'd started with, and those who returned swore the trees themselves had started taking sides. He didn't talk much. That alone made the others nervous. War was loud. Shells, screaming, orders barked at dawn. But he just listened, walked with the deer, set up camp without sound, carved figures from broken twigs, smiled once when someone called him noble savage. That guy didn't make it past Bastogne. The Germans never saw him, but they felt him. Boots would crunch the wrong twig, and then something would snap, low to the ground right at shin level, and a scream would split the dark. The squad would rush in, rifles raised, but there was never anyone there. Just blood, wire, and a crude coil trap made of pine, vine, and something the soldiers couldn't identify. It was like a ghost had built it. A ghost who knew their walk cycles, their patrol gaps, and how fast a femoral artery could bleed out. Some of the men called it luck. Others called it superstition. But the whispers were growing. A name started to pass between foxholes and mess tents, from New York draftees to Mississippi boys who still didn't believe in the Navajo code. They called him Ghost Maker, said he didn't blink, said he didn't even sleep. But that night in December, when the snow hadn't yet fallen and the trees steamed with frost, the whispers took shape. 3 German patrols moved through the forest under moonless cover. 12 men, 2 radios, 1 bloodhound trained for American scent. They never made it out. Not one bullet was fired. He carried no blueprint, no field manual, just memory. Passed through generations, not in words but in doing. His grandfather had taught him the tension of vine, the bite of sapwood under pressure, the way sinew could hold a trap tighter than rusted steel. German engineers had no answer for that. Neither did American command. What he built didn't show up on radar, didn't ping on mine detectors, and didn't clink when dropped. It was alive. It was organic, and it was ruthless. 2 feathers crouched low beneath a birch canopy, hands working without looking. Stripped cedar bark curled in his palm, soaked in resin. A tension knot was coiled. With delicate calculation, tight enough to snap bone, loose enough to reset. The frame was made from scavenged Wehrmacht field crate wood, lashed together with gut string and lined with hand-whittled thorns from a blackthorn bush he'd studied at dusk. It was a whisper trap. No noise. No flash, no time to scream. He didn't place traps where the enemy might go. He placed them where the enemy had to. Choke points, water routes, paths between bivouac zones and command posts. He watched their boots, noted their stride lengths, their fatigue. And like a surgeon setting bone, he buried those creations into the forest's rhythm. Even American GIs stepped carefully around him now. Some joked. Others watched their dogs whimper near his snares, refusing to pass. That night he didn't eat, didn't need to. Hunger made his ears sharper. He dragged a pine branch over his tracks, wiped the bark with smoke, and vanished into a nest of brush just 20 feet from his own trap. He waited, breathing with the wind, eyes open. Midnight. The first German patrol moved in, their boots sloppy with cold. One man stepped into the tension loop with his heel instead of his toe, exactly as 2 feathers predicted, and the trap fired. It didn't just tighten, it snapped. Not bone, ligament. The man went down without warning, his rifle flying out of reach. The others froze. But before they could react, the second trap activated from their flinch. It was a series, one failure triggering another, like falling dominoes hidden under leaves. They didn't fire back. They couldn't see. And he didn't stay to watch. By the time backup arrived, there was only evidence. Blood pooled like ink under brush. Boots abandoned in frozen mud. Traps dissolved into the forest like the myth they rode in on. The only thing left was the smear of panic on a half-used map, dropped in retreat. The trap had no metal, but it left scars iron couldn't match. They thought the Apache trapper was a ghost. They weren't wrong, but they were wrong about the ghost's face. She moved through the trees like mist, hair braided tight beneath a helmet taken from a fallen paratrooper. The uniform didn't quite fit. It hung off her shoulders in a way no European soldier wore, but that was the point. She wasn't trying to blend in with them. She was hiding in the gaps. Between the bark and the breath, between trigger and echo, her name was Sparrow. No last name, no rank that stuck. The Americans tried calling her Miss Marksman, the way they called Navajo code talkers talking wires. But the Apache called her something else, Da'ish, meaning one who walks with silence. And she didn't use a rifle like most did. She crafted her own sling bow hybrid from aircraft aluminum, leather harness, and carved yew. Her arrows were hand-shaved, dipped in poison derived from local mushrooms the Germans hadn't even noticed. Her kill count, nobody knew. She never reported them, but the medics did. They always had to carry out the ones with the strange wounds. No bullet, no blast, just sudden collapse and silence. Only one German ever saw her before he died. It was a patrolman, Lieutenant Klaus Werner, young, idealistic, fresh from the officer academy at Potsdam. He wasn't evil, just ambitious. His letters later revealed a strange mix of pride and poetry. And it was in one of those letters, intercepted and translated weeks later, that he described her. He'd been guarding a rail bridge when he spotted movement in the tree line. He didn't raise his rifle. He watched. His exact words, "She was no taller than a girl, but she stared like a god." Then he blinked. When his eyes opened again, there was a sharp pain in his throat. No scream, just warm blood on cold buttons. He crumpled, saw the sky, and wrote nothing more. Her arrow hadn't made a sound. It passed through a 2-inch gap in his collar, slicing just beneath his voice box. Clean, precise. She retrieved it on the way out. They say she left a feather near his body, not out of disrespect, out of recognition. Because she had once looked in a mirror and seen something human. But war changed that. Now she saw only roles: predator, ghost, signal. And the next day, when the Germans found Werner's body, they doubled their patrols, tripled their dogs, mapped every movement. It didn't matter. By then she was already behind them, watching, waiting. The rain started just after midnight. Not a downpour, just a cold mist that hung between the branches like breath from the dead. The Germans had planted the mines 2 days prior, ordered by a nervous commander who believed shadows in the forest were watching his every move. He was right, but the mines weren't for a squad. They were for one woman, Sparrow. The layout was brutal. 80 anti-personnel mines scattered across a 200-yard clearing, each one armed with tripwire so thin it shimmered only under moonlight. And they'd left one safe path, marked on a map locked in the commander's tent, a psychological snare. They wanted her to try it. She didn't. She didn't try any path, because she didn't walk like them. She didn't think like them. Sparrow dropped to her belly at the edge of the clearing, ears pressed to the earth like her ancestors once listened for buffalo. The soil told her everything, where men had walked, where they hadn't, where the tension of wire lay just beneath the moss. She began the crawl, inch by inch, elbows and knees in a rhythm so slow it took nearly 2 hours to cover 30 yards. She found one wire with her cheek, just the barest tremble of a hair-thin metal thread brushing against her skin. She paused, breathed out slowly through her nose, and reversed, then forward again. Behind her, deep in the trees, a small American recon unit watched through scopes. One whispered, "She's gonna die." The oldest sergeant just shook his head. "She's already dead to fear." Halfway through the field, the rain stopped. The moon cracked through the clouds. A fox darted out from the brush and vanished, triggering nothing. Nature knew where not to step, and so did she. At precisely 3:47, Sparrow reached the other side. She didn't celebrate. She didn't even stop. She left no prints, no trail. But she did leave something else. 30 white stones placed in a line behind her, one for every minute she'd spent crawling through German hell. Each stone marked a mine she'd bypassed. The next night, 3 Wehrmacht engineers tried to reset the field. They didn't make it out. Nobody ever reset that trap again. And the Germans began whispering something dark, something that made the younger troops cross themselves when the wind shifted. They called her Der Geist mit den Pfeilen, the ghost with arrows. And they were right. But even they hadn't seen what she was about to do next. In the center of Saint Laurent, a shattered village once home to 300 souls, stood the last thing the war hadn't leveled. A crooked stone chapel. Its bell tower leaned westward, like it was listening to the screams from Normandy. Every morning at 0600, the Germans rang its bell. Not for worship, for control. They said it was to mark the hour, but it was a flex, an insult in bronze, echoing across the ruins. The sound crawled into Sparrow's ears like a dare. It reminded her of something, a boarding school in Arizona. The morning clang before forced prayer. A bell like that took her language away. She'd never forgotten. Now she would answer it. The night before the next chime, she slipped into the chapel through a hole where stained glass once lived. Her moccasins made no sound on the rubble. She climbed the narrow wooden ladder to the tower and reached the bell chamber, now slick with bird droppings and ash. The bell rope hung limp. She didn't touch it. Instead, she reached into her satchel and pulled out a small pouch of powdered resin, a thin leather line soaked in lamp oil, and something few Apache ever used, an ignition fuse taken from a German tank. She wired the rope to the trigger. One pull, and the base of the bell would snap forward, striking a clay explosive hidden in its brace. No timer, no remote, only sound. She left as quietly as she came, taking only the crucifix from the altar. She didn't believe in it, but she respected the dead, and vanished into the forest before dawn. At 0600, the bell rang. Only once. The explosion ripped through the tower, hurling shards of bronze and mortar in every direction. 2 officers died instantly. A third stumbled from the doorway with half his face gone, screaming for help that never came. The bell itself split clean down the middle, landing in the nave like a broken promise. No shot had been fired, no footprint was found. The Germans went mad. They searched every tree line, every ditch, every rooftop. They accused the townspeople, interrogated priests, executed a baker, but they never found Sparrow. And the next morning, no bell, only silence. And in that silence, American units nearby whispered her name with reverence, not just for the kill, but for the meaning, for the way she answered old wounds with new tactics. She didn't just strike, she rewrote the sounds of war. The rifle was already aimed, breath steady, elbow tucked. Distance, 70 yards. Wind, none. Target? A figure moving through the grass just outside the German officer's tent. Small frame, hunched. She assumed it was a young runner, one of the Hitler Youth messengers they'd started deploying after their adult ranks thinned out. But something was wrong. He wasn't moving like a soldier. No coordination, no weapon, and the boots were far too large, slipping with every step like they weren't his. She adjusted the scope, fingers tightening. That's when she saw the face. A boy, 8, maybe 9. Eyes sunken, skin drawn pale, carrying a bundle of firewood in his arms, likely forced to fetch it from the bombed orchard behind the barracks. There was no defiance in him, no hate, just hunger. And suddenly Sparrow wasn't in France anymore. She was back on the San Carlos reservation, a child herself, barefoot and starved, gripping a tin bucket of roots she'd boiled into soup for her brothers. A white agent had knocked it out of her hand, told her to learn English before stealing food. Her finger trembled on the trigger. The boy reached the tent flap, paused, looked up. Their eyes met, hers through glass and steel, his through terror. But he didn't scream. He simply gave a nod, not of gratitude, just recognition, like he knew what she was, what she could do. And then he turned and disappeared inside. She could have fired, she didn't. That night she slept in a foxhole, soaked with rainwater, curled against a rock like it was her mother's lap. No dreams, just the boy's eyes. The next day, that officer's tent went up in flames, not because of her. Because of him. The boy had slipped a lit candle into a stash of fuel drums, likely thinking he'd be punished for coming back empty-handed. Instead, he burned half the encampment down. 12 Germans died. The others scattered. Sparrow watched from the tree line, unmoving. For once, she didn't feel like a ghost. She felt like a witness. She never saw the boy again, but for weeks she left food behind on windowsills, crates, and hollowed logs. A stolen biscuit, a piece of tinned ham, once even a whole canteen of milk. She didn't believe in redemption, but in that moment she believed in mercy, and it changed her next target. Not softer, just clearer. She would kill no more children, but the men who used them, they were now marked, and she never missed. They brought in Hauptsturmführer Erich Mahler from Berlin, clean uniform, jagged jaw. The kind of man who polished his boots before executions. He'd read the reports, men disappearing without bullet wounds, minefields deactivated. Without tools, a church bell turned into a death trap. Unacceptable, he said. Superstitious nonsense, he claimed. But Mahler had one weapon he believed could outmatch the ghost in the woods. Dogs. 6 of them. Trained Alsatians. Lean and hungry. Noses sharp from frontline scent tracking. Mahler ordered the locals rounded up. He held a child hostage until someone whispered about a woman with braids seen near the orchard. That's all he needed. He leashed the dogs at dawn and followed the trail himself, boots crunching over frost-bitten earth. "She leaves no scent," the villagers had said. Mahler grinned. "Everyone does, even spirits." For the first mile, it worked. The dogs howled and pulled, sniffing through moss and shattered timber. A few strands of black hair clung to a thorn bush, bait. She'd left it on purpose. Mahler took it as victory. At mile 2, the forest grew quiet, too quiet. He loosened his pistol holster. The dogs began to slow, noses twitching, confused. One whined, then stopped altogether, frozen near a rotted log. That's when it happened. The log exploded, but not in fire, in sound. Dozens of birds, jays, ravens, owls, erupted upward in a frenzy, flapping and screaming, startled by a small pouch Sparrow had rigged with animal musk and sulfur. The noise spooked the dogs. One broke its leash. Another bit Mahler's leg in blind panic. He fired twice, missed both times, and screamed for control. Sparrow was already behind him. She didn't shoot. She waited, watched. Let the dogs do what they were trained to do when terrified, turn on weakness. Within moments, Mahler was on his back, one arm bleeding, his commanding voice gone beneath growls and panic. He managed to crawl toward his radio pack, fingers trembling. That's when the arrow struck. Not in the chest, in the radio. She didn't want silence. She wanted him to know he was never in control. She left him there, alive, breathing, with one dog still loyal, licking his wound. American units found him the next day, raving about a woman who could command birds and ghosts and beasts. They thought he'd gone mad. But one soldier looked at the arrowhead lodged in the radio casing. Flint, shaped by hand, burnt at the edge for piercing armor. He'd seen one before, in Arizona. By late October, the forest near Metz was no longer just terrain. It was a war story whispered between regiments. American soldiers refused to enter without saying a prayer. Germans circled it entirely, calling it the Red Braids Maze. Some believed it was haunted. Others said it was wired with mines. The truth was stranger. Sparrow had turned the entire woodland into a shifting kill zone, no two traps ever in the same place for long. She never used wires or electronics. Her devices were made of twine, sap, bones, powder, and instinct. And they worked because she moved with them. Every time she changed hiding spots, she rethreaded her traps. Every time she sensed patrols nearby, she adjusted angles, tension points, fuse lengths. The forest was alive with her intuition. Tripwire set under a pile of leaves, connected to a shattered French wine bottle filled with nails and packed gunpowder. A log soaked in bear urine placed just so, to draw dogs into a spike trap they couldn't sniff through. Even a German helmet left on a branch, rigged to fall with a clink just loud enough to bait curiosity. She never relied on the same tactic twice. That's why they called it a maze. One night, a 12-man German patrol entered the forest. Only one came back. He told his CO he heard laughter, soft and distant, like wind through pine needles. Then a whisper of moccasins, then screams, then silence. No rifle shots, just thuds and panic. One man fell into a concealed pit filled with rusty bayonets. Another was taken by a sapling she'd bent and locked down, spring-loaded to strike upward like a snake. The surviving soldier never stopped shaking. And here's the most unnerving part. When Allied scouts tried to map the trap locations, they found none. Not because they didn't exist, but because Sparrow had already moved them. She'd been watching the scout party from 50 feet up in the trees, her breath shallow, her bow quiet across her chest. She let them go. They weren't the target. She only killed hunters. But every man who stepped foot in that forest knew this wasn't a battlefield anymore. It was hers, a living thing that shifted with the one woman who knew every root, slope, and branch like memory. A place where bullets weren't the enemy. Precision was, and the only rule left was hers. He was a captain in the Waffen SS. 42 confirmed killings, a sadist with medals, the kind who posed for photographs beside mass graves. His name was Klaus Riker, and he thought his brutality made him untouchable. Until the day his boots were found upside down, dangling from a tree, body missing. They didn't find him until 2 days later, face frozen in fear, hands bound behind his back with bark-stripped cord, no sign of trauma, except for one thing, a folded letter, placed neatly inside his inner breast pocket, written in perfect German ink. It was addressed, "To the next man who thinks I don't exist." The letter didn't threaten, it didn't boast. It didn't even mention a name. It described in brutal detail the last 2 hours of Riker's life, from the moment he set foot on the ruined church grounds to the instant he realized he was being watched. It recounted his cigarette brand, his choice of boot polish, the fact he hummed Bach when walking alone. Then it noted the exact moment he urinated on the grave of a young French girl, aged 12, buried under a collapsed bell tower. The final line read, "I see how you die before you do, because I already saw who you are." It was signed with a symbol, not a name, not a military code, just a symbol burned into the paper with a hot arrowhead, the stylized outline of a hawk in flight, twisted mid-dive. That symbol would later become part of a classified Allied file. Unknown guerrilla asset, designation Red Braid. Dozens of letters like it were found during the last year of the war, some in pockets, some carved into rifle stocks, one even sewn into a German officer's glove, stitched with sinew. Each letter was tailored to the victim. No two were the same, and that terrified commanders more than the kills. Because it meant she was watching, not just hunting, watching. Psychological warfare, the Americans called it, but for the men who read those letters, it wasn't psychology, it was prophecy. How did she know so much? Their habits, their sins, their weaknesses. It was as if the forest itself had eyes, or as if somewhere in the trees an old spirit had remembered every cruelty and whispered the names to her. The last page of Riker's file remained sealed in Bundesarchiv records. But the U.S. translator who read it before classification retired to Arizona, and when he died in 1978, his family found something taped to the inside of his bedroom mirror, that same hawk symbol, burned into birch bark. They called the war over in May of 1945. Flags were raised, cities bombed, Flat began rebuilding, generals gave speeches. But in a dusty Allied outpost near the Rhine, 3 officers huddled over a single file folder with no name on the tab, only a red hawk hand-drawn in the corner. Inside were 10 typed pages, no cover sheet, no rank, no military ID, just a series of field reports signed by anonymous scouts, each describing a woman whose tactics didn't follow conventional warfare. No fingerprints, no photos, only testimonies, all disturbing in their consistency. She never missed, she left no tracks. She turned German officers against one another with staged killings and forged communiques. She operated alone, refused supply drops. Once, an Allied unit tried to leave her a crate of ammunition in thanks. She burned it. And in the final report, one officer wrote something that sealed her fate. Her loyalty is not to country, it is to something older. She sees this war not as borders but as balance. She fights with rules no one gave her permission to use. That line was underlined. Twice. And that was the moment the erasure began. No medals, no commendations, no name on the list of Allied assets. The reports were moved to a classified archive labeled Folkloric Irregulars, the same folder where they'd stored rumors about monks who survived execution squads and nuns who walked through minefields without triggering a single device. Eventually, her file vanished entirely. The men who had served alongside her were told to forget. Some were reassigned. Others never returned home. One, an American sniper she had once rescued from a collapsed bell tower, refused to speak for decades. He died in Oregon in 1992. His last words were whispered in Lakota when translated by his grandson. They read, "The forest breathes if you know her name." And here's the twist. In 2004, a French farmer renovating his grandfather's wine cellar found a rusted tin tucked behind a stone wall. Inside was a roll of bark-bound notes, each describing a different mission, written in multiple languages: German, English, Cree, Ojibwe, Lakota. The final page simply read, "I was not the only one," and it was signed, with her name, not in ink, but in braided horsehair, burned into the page with the tip of an arrow. The museum that received the artifact said it was culturally sensitive and declined to display it, because once her name is known, again, she's no longer a myth, she's history.